She kissed him in the dark hallway, and the whole time she felt nothing she hadn't felt before. That was the problem. Her name was Zara, 20 years old, half Nigerian, half Korean, and 100% done with starting over. She had transferred to Hanguk Arts University in the middle of the semester with 2 suitcases, a carefully packed box of vinyl records, and a reputation she had spent the last year trying to outrun. She walked through the campus gates with her locks pulled back tight, her jaw set like she was bracing for impact, and her eyes scanning every face she passed to see who already knew. Nobody seemed to. That was the first miracle. The second miracle walked toward her from across the courtyard before she had even found the registrar's office. "Zara!" She stopped. Her whole body stopped. Because that voice belonged to someone she hadn't heard in 14 months. Someone she had tried, very hard and very unsuccessfully, to forget. Park Junho stood in a pool of early morning light wearing a pale yellow hoodie, and he was smiling at her like she had never left. Like no time had passed. Like the world hadn't crumbled around her and scattered her across cities and shame and silence. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Your mom told my mom," he said, as if that explained everything. And it did, because that was Junho. He always knew exactly where she was. He walked up to her and took her heavier suitcase without asking, and she let him because some things don't change no matter how much you try to outgrow them. They fell into step together. And within 30 seconds, they were laughing about the time in 9th grade she had accidentally walked into the boys' bathroom during a fire drill and stood there arguing that it was her right to be there, because the fire didn't care about gender. By the time they reached the admin building, she had forgotten, briefly, what it felt like to be someone running from something. That was what Junho did. He made her forget. Park Junho was what people in their hometown called golden. He was the kind of beautiful that made strangers nervous. The kind of person teachers trusted automatically and parents loved immediately. He had a laugh that sounded like it was genuinely surprised every time, and he remembered everyone's birthday, and he showed up. He always showed up. They had grown up in the same neighborhood in Itaewon, the children of families who had blended cultures so thoroughly that their kitchens smelled of both doenjang and egusi at the same time. They had been best friends from age 9, something more than friends from age 16, and then carefully, painfully nothing from age 19, when Zara's life had exploded and she had decided that running was easier than rebuilding. Now she was back. Not to him exactly, but near him. And he was acting like near him, and with him were the same thing, and she didn't have the strength to correct him yet. Her first week passed in a blur of syllabi and campus maps, and trying to decode the social architecture of a new school. She had a single room in the arts dormitory that smelled faintly of turpentine and old wood, and she spent her evenings unpacking slowly, as if the slower she moved, the more permanent it would feel. Junho texted her every morning, not long messages, just things like, "There's fresh hotteok near the East Gate," or, "Your Professor Kim is actually decent, don't let anyone scare you." Small things, warm things. She started looking forward to them in a way that made her nervous. It was during her second week that she first encountered Siyeon. She had heard his name before she ever saw his face. The other students spoke about him the way people speak about weather, as a force that existed, that could not be avoided, and that had no interest in your feelings about it. He was the son of Kwon Sang, the media conglomerate CEO whose name was on 2 of the university's buildings. He was enrolled in the business and media program, and according to everyone Zara had spoken to, he was brilliant in a way that was almost rude. "He doesn't talk much," her roommate Bissy had explained, perching on Zara's windowsill with a cup of ramen. "But when he does, it's like devastating." He said one sentence to Professor Jung last semester, and she had to excuse herself. What did he say? Something about the fundamental dishonesty of performative solidarity. Bissy shrugged. Or something like that. Anyway, stay out of his way. Zara met him on a Tuesday. She was in the media center, trying to access the audio archive for a project, and the system kept rejecting her new student credentials. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes growing increasingly frustrated when someone leaned across her from the next workstation and typed something into her terminal without asking. The archive opened. She turned to look at who had done it, and Siyeon looked back at her with dark, unhurried eyes. "Your department code was wrong," he said. "Transfer students get a different prefix." "Thank you," she said, "because what else do you say?" He looked at her for one moment longer than was comfortable, and then he turned back to his own screen. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, he appeared beside her in the campus caf and said, without preamble, "You were in the archive pulling sound files from the 2021 Nairobi Music Summit." She stiffened. So that's a strange project for a first-year transfer student in the vocal arts program. He picked up his coffee. "Unless you're not actually doing a class project. What I'm doing is none of your business." "Correct," he said, and left. She stared at the door for a long time after he walked out, and she could not explain the strange, prickling feeling under her skin. Not attraction, exactly. More like the feeling of being seen by someone who hadn't asked permission and wasn't apologizing for it. The school hosted a cultural showcase at the end of her 3rd week, a big, sprawling evening event that pulled in students from every department. Junho found her early in the evening and stayed close, and it was easy, the way it always was with him. He introduced her to his friends smoothly, smoothed over the awkward moments where people glanced at her curiously, and made her laugh 3 times in the first hour. When the crowd thinned toward midnight, they drifted down an empty corridor, lined with framed photographs of past performances, and Junho stopped in front of one of a girl playing the kora on a stage covered in petals. "Remember when you used to say you were going to play every instrument ever made before you turned 25, he said. "I still have 5 years, she said. He laughed, and the sound echoed softly off the walls. Then he turned to look at her, and the laughter faded into something quieter and more serious. "You don't have to keep acting like you're a guest here," he said. "You don't have to pretend with me, not ever." She looked at him, at his familiar face and his careful eyes, and something in her chest loosened. "Junho, you don't have to say anything," he said. And then he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and slow, the way you kiss someone you already know, and she kissed him back because it felt like coming home. And because it was easy, and because part of her had been waiting for him to do it since she walked through those campus gates. But even as it happened, even as her heart pulled toward him with the weight of years and memory, something whispered underneath all of it. "This is easy because it requires nothing from you." She didn't listen to that whisper. Not yet. What changed everything was a file. It happened 3 weeks later, at the library, in a completely ordinary moment. Zara was looking for a printed transcript of an old interview, and the archive assistant pulled the wrong folder and handed her a stack of documents that included, by accident, a printed copy of an old internal student affairs report. She almost put it back without reading it, but her name was on it. She sat down slowly. The report was from her old university, the one she had left in disgrace after a recording of her was leaked without her consent, a private performance session that someone had filmed and posted with false, cruel captions. The fallout had been swift and brutal. People had called her names. The school had done nothing. She had withdrawn. The report outlined the investigation, or the lack of one. It listed the names of people interviewed. Park Junho was on the list. He had been interviewed. He had told the investigators that he had, quote, "no knowledge of who may have recorded or distributed the content." She stared at that line for a very long time. She knew, with a cold certainty that settled into her bones, that that was a lie. She had told Junho about the recording session herself, that same night it happened, in a panic call from outside the campus building. She had told him exactly where it was and who else had been in the room. He had known, and he had said nothing. She went back to her dorm room and sat on the floor. The person she called, without thinking, without planning, was Siyeon. She didn't even understand why until he picked up and said, "What happened?" And she realized that she had called him because she had somehow, without meaning to, started to trust that he would not perform comfort. He would not make it smaller than it was. "Can I meet you somewhere?" she said. They met in the small garden behind the music block. She told him everything, not because she owed it to him, but because the truth was sitting in her chest like a stone and she needed someone who could hold weight. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Did you confront him?" "Not yet." "Are you going to?" "I don't know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "He was probably protecting himself. That doesn't make it less of a betrayal, it just makes it more common." She looked at him. "You knew something, didn't you, about the scandal?" He didn't flinch. "I heard rumors when you transferred in. I recognized your name. And I thought it wasn't my place to say anything until you brought it up." She laughed, short and humorless. "At least you didn't pretend." "I don't pretend," he said, and it wasn't arrogance. It was just true. She pulled away from Junho after that, not dramatically. She just stopped answering in the mornings. stopped showing up to the courtyard where he usually waited, stopped letting herself be pulled back by the familiar gravity of him. He noticed, of course. He texted her, "Did I do something?" And she didn't know how to answer that. "Yes, a year ago, before I even got here, before I even knew I needed you to save me and you chose not to." And then the rumors started again. It was small at first. A whisper on a student forum. Someone who said they had seen something at her old school. Comment thread that had her name in it alongside words she had spent a year trying to forget. She found it at 2 in the morning and felt the floor tilt. By morning it had spread. She didn't go to class. She sat in her room with the curtains drawn and her phone face down and her heart hammering like she was back in that hallway at her old school, watching her world dismantle itself in real time. Bissy knocked on her door. She didn't open it. Junho called. She didn't answer. Only one person slid a note under the door. 4 words, "I'm outside. Come out." She recognized the handwriting because she had seen it on a library return slip once and thought it was unusual, angular, and deliberate. She opened the door. Siyeon was leaning against the wall in the corridor with his hands in his pockets, looking like he had nowhere else to be. He looked at her face, at the red edges of her eyes, and he didn't say "You'll be okay" or "It's not that bad" or "People will forget." He said, "Come on." They ended up in an empty practice room. It was raining outside, and the sound of it against the high windows was the only sound for a long time. She sat on the piano bench and he sat on the floor against the wall, and she talked, haltingly, about what it had felt like the first time. The humiliation of it, the loneliness, the way it had made her feel like her own skin was something that could be taken from her. He listened to all of it. When she stopped talking, her voice had worn itself out into something flat and tired. "Stop running back to people who failed you," he said quietly. Something in her cracked open. "You don't get to act like you care." "I'm not acting," he said. "Then what is this? What are you doing? Why do you keep showing up?" He stood up slowly, and the distance between them disappeared without her deciding to let it. And when he kissed her, it wasn't soft, it wasn't careful. It was the kind of kiss that happens when 2 people have been fighting the truth of something and they both stop fighting at the same time. She was still angry. She was still hurt. Her hands were shaking slightly when she pulled back. He looked at her with those dark, unhurried eyes. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "You don't have to know yet," he said. She went home that evening and finally opened Junho's messages. There were 11 of them. The last one said, "I know something is going on. Let me in, please. You always let me in." She stared at that for a long time. "You always let me in." Yes, that was the problem, wasn't it? The confrontation happened the next afternoon. She had been walking back from the library when Junho appeared beside her on the path, falling into step with the casual ease of someone who had been watching for her. "Zara, talk to me." She stopped walking. She turned to face him. "I read the investigation report," she said, "from last year." The light shifted in his face, just slightly, just enough. "You were interviewed," she said. "You told them you didn't know anything." "Zara, I called you that night. I told you everything. I told you who was in the room." Her voice was level. She had cried all she was going to cry about this already, in that practice room in the rain. "You knew." "It was complicated," he said, and she felt something inside her go very still. Complicated. If I had named someone, it would have come back to me. My family was already dealing with there was pressure from the board, and my scholarship. "So you stayed quiet?" she said. "While they dragged my name through every corner of that school, while I had to leave, while I spent 14 months hiding. You stayed quiet because it was easier." "I thought it would blow over," he said, and his voice had a desperate edge now. "I thought you'd be okay. You always bounce back, Zara. You're strong." "Don't do that," she said. "Don't use my strength as a reason why it was okay to abandon me." He reached for her arm. "I have loved you your whole life. Doesn't that mean anything?" She looked at him. At the golden, familiar face she had known for 11 years. And she felt the grief of it, real and full, the grief of something that had been precious and was now ruined, not by cruelty exactly, but by the particular smallness that lives inside even good people when the cost of being good gets too high. "It meant something," she said. "It used to mean everything." She stepped back. "But you loved the idea of being the person who saved me. And when it actually cost you something, you disappeared." She walked away. He came after her. "You're choosing him, aren't you?" he said, and his voice had changed. The desperation had curdled into something harder. "Kwon Siyeon, you're choosing someone you've known for 5 minutes over someone who has been here your whole life." She turned around. "He's a jerk, Zara. He doesn't care about people. He's cold and he's calculated and he's going to hurt you. He didn't let me get hurt when he could have stopped it, she said flatly. That's more than I can say. That's not fair. Do you want to talk about fair? Her voice rose for the first time and she let it. You want to stand here and talk to me about fair? I lost everything last year. My program, my confidence, my sense of safety. I had to start completely over. And you could have said one true thing to one person and it would have changed everything, and you didn't. You want to call him a jerk? You hid behind me and called it love. That's worse. That is so much worse. Junho stared at her. His mouth opened and closed. And then, because there was nothing left to say, she turned and walked away again, and this time he didn't follow. She found Siyeon in the courtyard near the east building, sitting on a low wall with a book in his hands, looking as unbothered as he always did, as if the world could be rearranging itself around him, and he would simply observe it and take note. He looked up when she approached, and she could see in the slight shift of his expression that he was reading her face the way he always did, carefully and without ceremony. I talked to Junho, she said. How did that go? He accused me of being disloyal and called you a jerk. The corner of his mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile. On him, it was better than a smile. He's not entirely wrong about the jerk part, Siyeon said. She laughed, and it surprised her, the realness of it. I chose you, she said, for the record. He set the book down and looked at her with those eyes that never rushed to any conclusion. I know, he said. You didn't have to walk across campus to tell me. I already knew. You're so annoying, she said. He stood up, and there was that quality he had of moving with complete intention, no wasted motion, no performance. He reached out and tucked a loose lock behind her ear. Ignore the noise, he said. It gets quieter. Promise? No, he said, but I'll still be here when it's loud. And then he kissed her, there in the open courtyard with the afternoon light falling sideways across the pavement. And she kissed him back with her whole chest, with all of her, with the part that was tired of hiding, and the part that was still healing, and the part that had walked through those campus gates 2 months ago bracing for impact. She had been bracing for the wrong thing. She hadn't been about to be hit. She had been about to be found, not by the boy who had always known her and had used that knowledge to keep her small. Not by the comfort of familiarity, which she had confused, for years, with safety. By the boy who had seen exactly who she was in the middle of her mess, in the middle of her guarded and fractured and complicated reality, and had decided without fanfare or announcement that she was worth showing up for. That was the difference. Junho had loved the Zara who laughed in empty hallways and bounced back from everything and never needed too much. The Zara who was easy to love. Siyeon had walked straight toward the Zara who was difficult and raw and still flinching from old wounds, and he had not asked her to be anything else. She pulled back from the kiss and looked at him. For someone who claims not to care about people, she said, you are very bad at proving it. He raised one eyebrow. I didn't say I don't care about people. I said I don't perform caring for an audience. Right, she said. Very important distinction. It is, he said seriously. She shook her head, smiling, and she reached up and took his hand. And he let her hold it without making a thing of it. They stood there in the late afternoon light, and the campus moved around them the way life does, full of noise and motion and the daily drama of young people trying to become themselves. And Zara felt, for the first time in over a year, not like someone running from a past that kept catching up to her. She felt like someone who had arrived somewhere. It wasn't perfect. The forum threads were still there. The whispers would not disappear overnight. She still had work to do, inside herself and out, and the grief of what Junho had failed to do was real and would take time to settle into something she could carry without it cutting. But she was here. She was present. She was not pretending. That was enough. That was, she was beginning to understand everything. If this story found something in you, if you felt that tension of loving the safe choice and recognizing it as the wrong one, give this video a like. It keeps stories like this coming to you. Drop in the comments. Were you rooting for Junho, or did you see through him from the beginning? I want to know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now because this channel is for everyone who has ever had to choose between comfort and truth and chose truth. New story drops every day. Don't miss it.